There's something sacred about silence, real silence. Not the kind you get between commercials or in the lull before the microwave beeps. I mean the kind of silence that wraps around your soul like a wool blanket, the kind you only find miles from anything paved in a place the cell towers forgot. That's why we bought the cabin. My wife and I found it just after my early retirement from the Air Force. 30 years in uniform. 30 years of base housing, barking orders, deployments, salutes, checklists, and the constant low thrum of jet engines. When I retired, we didn't want a house in a golf community or a beachfront condo. We wanted trees, stars, dirt roads, and a cabin with creaking floors and a wood stove that smoked like an old man telling stories. The place sat on 6 acres tucked against the eastern ridge of a mountain range that had no name, just legends. The HOA that governed the area was barely a blip when we bought it, a handful of guidelines, mostly about septic tank spacing and keeping fires safe. We paid our dues every year, no fuss. Never met the board, never attended a meeting. It was fine, invisible. The way it should be. It became our sanctuary. My wife, Callie Brennan, was in her own chapter of life by then. She was still working, though. If you asked her what she did, she'd say training development and leave it at that. She was never one to brag. I knew better, of course. I knew exactly who she was. I'd watched her spend 2 decades moving up the ranks in federal law enforcement. She trained agents, real ones for the FBI, recruit supervisors, even the ones being recertified for counterintelligence. But at the cabin, she didn't need to be that. She was just Callie, my wife, a woman who chopped her own firewood and made the best cornbread on earth. The weekend it started, we were both burned out. She'd had a brutal month at Quantico, something about a rogue training scenario gone wrong, and I'd been fielding a property dispute back home with a neighbor who thought my oak tree was on his side of the line. We packed up the truck, locked our phones in the glove box, and headed to the cabin for what we called a quiet reboot. Friday evening was perfect. We made dinner on the porch, cast iron skillet corn on the cob grilled trout. The sun painted the sky in orange streaks, and the only sound was the wind through the pines. We slept like the dead that night, wrapped in flannel, and the deep breathing of a forest unbothered by time. Saturday morning, I was splitting logs near the edge of the property while Callie brewed coffee inside. It was just before 8:00 a.m. when I noticed a dust cloud rising at the end of our long gravel drive. I paused, wiped sweat from my brow, and squinted toward the ridge. An SUV. Big, black, no plates. I didn't think much of it at first. Occasionally lost hikers or UPS drivers showed up here by mistake. But this wasn't a meandering, apologetic approach. The vehicle moved with purpose, direct, assertive, like it knew exactly where it was going. My gut tightened. The SUV rolled up and stopped 5 feet from our porch. I stood still, axe in hand, heart drumming a little louder. The engine cut off. Then the driver's door opened. Out stepped a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Military build, buzz cut, wraparound sunglasses. He wore a black tactical vest with bold white letters across the chest, HOA Enforcement. My first reaction, confusion. HOA Enforcement in tactical gear. We'd never seen anything like that. No official HOA patrol, no badges, no uniforms, and definitely not someone who looked like he just stepped out of a SWAT movie. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked around to the back of the SUV, popped it open, and pulled out a clipboard and what looked like a padded holster. I couldn't tell if it held a real weapon, but it was shaped like one. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting the axe down with deliberate care. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, like I was gum stuck to his boot. "I need to speak with the property owner," he said flatly. "You're speaking to him," I replied, walking slowly toward the porch. "This is private property. Who exactly are you?" He raised the clipboard like a badge. It was laminated with an HOA logo at the top, but no state seal, no legal reference number, no signature. "I'm Evan Braxton with Evergreen Range Homeowners Association Enforcement. This property has multiple violations. I'm here to conduct an inspection and initiate citation procedures." I blinked. "Excuse me, we haven't received any notices. What violations? I'm not obligated to disclose." "That without entry. he said curtly, already stepping onto the first stair of the porch. You'll need to stand aside. Callie stepped out of the cabin just then, holding her coffee mug in both hands. She wore a simple gray hoodie and flannel pajama pants, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked calm, almost bored. Is there a problem? She asked evenly. The man turned to her, straightened his posture. Ma'am, are you the co-owner of this property? Yes. Then I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. You're in violation of several community ordinances and will be detained pending further investigation. Callie raised one eyebrow. Detained by you? That's correct, he said, reaching into his vest. This is an HOA arrest. I felt my chest go cold. An HOA arrest. There's no such thing, I said sharply, moving between them. You don't have jurisdiction. You're not law enforcement. He ignored me. Ma'am, if you resist, I will be forced to escalate. He took a step forward. Callie didn't flinch. She simply sipped her coffee and smiled. I suggest you put that back in your vest, she said calmly, before this situation gets embarrassing for you. I saw it in her eyes then, not fear, not even anger. Strategy. She was calculating, measuring, waiting. The man blinked, uncertain. You're interfering with a community compliance operation. This is your final warning. Callie set her coffee mug on the porch rail, then reached slowly into the front pocket of her hoodie. Her fingers closed around something I couldn't see. The man's hand hovered near his vest again. And in that moment, just for a heartbeat, I remembered who she really was. Not just my wife, not just the woman who made cornbread and loved campfire stories. She was the one who trained FBI agents in tactical de-escalation counter-surveillance and field interrogation, and she had just activated whatever plan she had been silently building. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste like the metallic bite of adrenaline and wet pine. I stood between them, one step down from the porch, heart pounding like I was back in Kandahar clearing buildings. Callie's hand still rested in her hoodie pocket. Evan Braxton didn't move. You're obstructing a compliance operation, he said again, though this time his voice had lost some of its conviction. I glanced at Callie. Her expression hadn't changed, but I knew that look. It was the same one I saw years ago when she testified against a dirty contractor funneling FBI funds. Cold, surgical, patient, a lioness playing with her prey before the strike. I'm going to say this once more, she said, her voice clear and calm, like a metronome. Leave the property now, or you will be detained under federal law for impersonating a law enforcement officer and attempting an unlawful detainment. The man didn't answer, but I noticed his jaw clench. A bead of sweat ran down from beneath his sunglasses. He was calculating, trying to figure out whether we were bluffing or dangerous. He settled on dangerous, and not in the way he expected. Ma'am, I have authority from the Evergreen Range Homeowners Association. He began. No, you don't. Callie cut in. You have a laminated printout with no seal, no authorization code, and no legal backing. You just attempted to arrest a private citizen without due process on private land while armed and in disguise. That's a felony. Multiple ones, actually. I saw his hand twitch again, and instinct made me move just half a step forward, enough to draw attention. Don't, I said firmly, my voice dropping into the tone I'd used with new recruits too eager to act tough. Don't reach again unless you're prepared to be dropped where you stand. He froze. Callie pulled her hand from her pocket, not a weapon, but her phone. She tapped it once. A tiny blinking light in the upper left corner told me all I needed to know. She'd been recording the entire exchange. Audio, video, possibly even GPS time-stamped. Let's take a look at that clipboard, she said, walking toward him with the quiet authority of someone who has nothing to prove. To his credit, Evan Braxton didn't bolt. He didn't lash out. But he didn't hand over the clipboard either. Instead, he stepped back, clutched it tighter, and barked, I'll be filing an official report. You'll be hearing from the HOA board. Callie raised her eyebrows. I'm counting on it. Without another word, the man backed off the porch, got into his SUV, and peeled out so fast he kicked up a wall of gravel dust that hung in the morning air like fog. We stood there for several seconds after the engine noise faded. Then I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Well, I muttered, that was one hell of a morning. Callie didn't respond right away. She stared down the road, eyes scanning the horizon, mind clearly still in processing mode. We need to talk, she finally said. Inside. We stepped into the cabin, shut the door behind us, and she immediately moved to the kitchen counter. From a locked drawer near the spice rack, one I'd always thought just held old maps and emergency radios, she pulled out a sleek black hard case and opened it. Inside were credentials. Real ones. FBI. Federal Training Division. I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. Babe, I said slowly, you said you handled training stuff. She gave me a look. I do. I oversee live scenario certifications, policy enforcement simulations, and interagency compliance audits. I train field agents, and sometimes we keep that low profile for good reason. I nodded, sitting down hard on the nearest chair. Okay, so what do we do now? She locked the case again. Now we report it. I've already transmitted the audio file to my backup. It's geotagged. Facial recognition will be able to ID him. But I have a feeling this goes deeper than just one fake officer. I rubbed my temples. You think the HOA's in on it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled her laptop from her bag, flipped it open, and began typing. A few minutes later, she turned the screen toward me. Evergreen Range Homeowners Association, she said. Their site is locked behind a password. No public access. But I traced the domain registration. It's hosted under a shell LLC based out of Nevada. That's a classic laundering tactic. So this might not even be a real HOA. Oh, it's real enough for tax purposes, but this, she pointed to the screen, is not normal. On the homepage was a list of violations that could trigger on-site intervention, unauthorized fencing noise disturbances, failure to pay fees, and a vague clause called behavior unbecoming of a community member. That last one sent chills down my spine. She clicked through the cached inspection history entries that included the words site secured item confiscated and even compliance enforced with physical removal. Some entries were marked with red dots. One had a skull emoji beside it. This isn't a HOA, she said. It's a front, possibly a control ring for something much darker. My mind reeled. All we'd wanted was peace, a weekend to breathe. Instead, we'd been targeted by a quasi-military operation wrapped in homeowner legalese. We didn't talk much for the rest of the morning. Callie was on the phone with an internal contact in D.C., someone named Jenna Carter. I only heard half the conversation, but it involved terms like paramilitary impersonation, property infiltration, and shadow compliance board. By noon, we had a plan. We'd stay the night. Keep a low profile. But Callie had flagged the cabin for federal protection. If the fake cop came back, or if anyone else did, they'd be walking into a whole different kind of ambush. As the sun dipped below the tree line that evening, I stepped out onto the porch with a cold beer and stared down the road. The same one he'd come up. The same one that might bring more trouble tomorrow. I didn't know what we were up against, but I knew this much. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning broke colder than expected for spring. Mist hung low over the treetops like breath held too long, and a stillness wrapped the cabin like a secret. Callie was up before me, already dressed in tactical gray cargo pants and a fleece half-zip that said nothing, yet somehow implied everything. She moved quietly, efficiently, like her body had entered some sort of familiar mode, calm, alert, ready. I made coffee while she reviewed the footage on her phone again. She zoomed in frame by frame on Evan Braxton's vest, his clipboard, the SUV's interior through the cracked rear window. She paused on a moment. I remembered clearly the second he reached toward his chest holster. Her finger hovered over the screen, then tapped once to save a still. You think he'll come back? I asked. Callie didn't look up. No. Relief began to swell in my chest. He'll send someone else, she finished. So much for relief. Before I could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel drifted through the open kitchen window. Not the heavy growl of a lone SUV, but several sets of wheels. Callie's eyes met mine. No panic, just silent confirmation. It's happening. We stepped out onto the porch together, coffee mugs in hand, like it was any other peaceful morning. But inside I could feel every nerve firing like a tripwire. Two vehicles approached. One was the same black SUV as yesterday. The second was a white pickup truck with magnetic decals on both doors, Evergreen Range, Compliance, Division. The font was blocky and overconfident, the kind a high school graphic design student might think looks official. From the SUV, Evan Braxton stepped out, buzz-cut sunglasses, tactical vest. This time, however, he had company. Two others emerged from the truck. One wore a dark blue polo and carried what looked like a utility bag. The other, taller and wiry, wore a tan jacket with the same HOA enforcement logo, only his had a badge pin attached, a fake badge, but shiny enough to fool someone at a glance. They marched up our drive like they owned it. I could already feel my fists curling at my sides. I took one step forward. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up again." Evan Braxton didn't speak. It was the man in the tan jacket who took charge this time. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, almost too polite. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan," he said, glancing at a clipboard, "you've been served an official HOA summons for non-compliance. We are here to escort Mrs. Brennan off-site for questioning regarding unauthorized modifications to the property and violations of Section 9, Subsection B of the Evergreen Covenant." Callie blinked. "Section 9 deals with landscaping height restrictions. I haven't touched a shovel." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions," the man replied, holding out a piece of paper. She didn't take it. "This isn't a court order," she said flatly. "It's a printed paragraph with no legal seal, no judicial signature, and no jurisdiction." "I'm going to need you to come with us anyway," he said. That's when I stepped between them, again, heat rising in my chest. "You lay one hand on my wife. And I swear to God, sir," he interrupted, "you're interfering in an active compliance operation. I must advise you." "No," Callie said suddenly. "You're the one who needs advice." She moved past me, slowly, deliberately stepping off the porch to face them directly. "I am a federal training officer," she said. "I oversee field readiness and agent certification for the FBI. I am not a civilian, under your authority. I am not subject to HOA arrest. And if you touch me, detain me, or so much as threaten me again, there will be federal charges with your names on every line." The silence that followed was immediate. The man with the clipboard looked from her to his partner. Even Evan Braxton seemed to hesitate, his grip on the vest tightening. Callie wasn't finished. "And just in case your hearing is as bad as your legal training, I've been recording this interaction live to a remote server. Facial recognition has already matched your ID to a previous incident. You're not just trespassing now. You're escalating a federal impersonation offense." The man in the tan jacket looked rattled but not entirely convinced. He took a step forward anyway. That's when Evan Braxton made his move. He reached again, this time with purpose, fast, direct, toward whatever he kept hidden beneath the tactical vest. Callie reacted faster. She pivoted to the side, her foot sweeping across gravel, and in a flash she had something in her hand. Not a weapon, just her phone. But the way she held it low and angled like a badge drew every eye. With one motion, she flipped open a concealed flap and exposed her credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Training Division, Supervisory Field Instructor, everything stopped. I watched their faces shift like a curtain yanked from a stage. The man in the tan jacket went pale. Evan Braxton took a full step back. The clipboard man seemed to forget how to breathe. "No more warnings," Callie said, her voice a quiet thunder. "All of you off my property, now!" The three men stood frozen. Behind us, from somewhere in the woods, came the sound of snapping branches and approaching engines. Moments later, two government SUVs appeared unmistakable, even in civilian paint jobs. From the first, two plainclothes agents stepped out, followed by a woman in aviator glasses holding a tablet. "Ma'am," one of them said to Callie, with a slight nod. "Backup, as requested. Orders are to detain all suspects on site for impersonation, unauthorized surveillance, and attempted abduction of a federal official." The fake HOA cops didn't move. "I suggest you comply," the agent said, drawing cuffs from his belt. "You're already on federal land. That cabin sits on a protective easement acquired by the DOJ in 2009. You're lucky she gave you a warning." Evan Braxton finally spoke. We were told it was just a non-compliant homeowner, No Callie said. You were told a lie, and you ran with it. The agents moved in quickly. One by one, the imposters were disarmed, cuffed, and read their rights. The clipboard was taken as evidence. The phony badge went into an evidence bag. All of it handled with the efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times before. I stood on the porch and watched it unfold like a slow-motion movie. I wasn't angry anymore, just hollow, numb. The kind of numb that settles in when you realize the people meant to protect community life had turned it into a weapon. One of the agents turned to me. We'll need a statement. You'll have it, I said. Callie came back up the porch stairs and slipped her hand into mine. For the first time in days, I felt the weight lift. But something inside me said this was just the beginning. The agents cleared out quickly after the arrests. They were surgical efficient without showmanship. Just 3 SUVs, a mobile command terminal, zip-tied evidence cases, and an authority you could feel in your bones. The fake HOA enforcers were processed on site and transported within an hour. Callie gave her full briefing on the porch with her voice low and calm, as if she'd done it 100 times before. Because she had. After they left, the quiet returned. But it wasn't the peaceful silence we'd come here to find. It was the kind of quiet that hummed with questions. I sat on the front steps while Callie made another encrypted call on her laptop inside. I didn't ask to whom. Honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know just yet. What I did want to know more than anything was what the hell was going on with this HOA. Because this wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't 3 idiots with too much time and a tactical vest between them. No, this was structured, coordinated. Someone had fed them a script and they followed it like they were trained. Callie stepped outside again, her laptop tucked under one arm, and 2 mugs of fresh coffee in the other. Still black, no sugar, she asked. I nodded. Thanks. She handed it to me and sat beside me staring at the trees like they might talk back. I thought HOAs were supposed to be boring, I muttered. Pool rules, trash bins, grass length. She smiled faintly. That's what makes them dangerous, when they're hijacked. You think this one's been hijacked? I think, she said slowly, someone is using it as a legal costume. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the printed notice Evan Braxton had handed her earlier, the so-called official summons. I hadn't looked at it closely yet. She spread it across her lap and tapped the heading. Evergreen Range Homeowners Association, she read aloud. Then in smaller print, authorized to operate under regional residential codes. That's meaningless legal filler. She pointed further down. No signatory, no enforcement clause, no jurisdiction listed. And this, she tapped the final paragraph, claims the HOA has the right to detain property owners pending compliance review. That's not just false. That's criminal impersonation of government authority. My hands tightened around the mug. And here's the kicker, she continued. These guys, they're banking on intimidation, not paperwork. They expect you not to ask questions. Well, I said you asked. She gave me a side glance. No, I requested. Okay, I said. You requested. She sipped her coffee, then stood and walked over to our mailbox, a rusted old box hanging on a post that leaned like it was tired of the job. She pulled the lid open and pulled out 3 letters, one of them stamped with a red label that read, Urgent HOA Infraction inside. She brought them back and laid them on the porch. We never checked the mail, she said. That's on us. I tore open the red stamped one. Inside was a 2-page document outlining a list of infractions: improper roof color, unregistered exterior fire pit, unapproved window replacements. We hadn't replaced any windows. The fire pit had been there since we bought the place. And the roof metal, slate gray. HOA approved per their own color codes. At the bottom, the letter stated, failure to comply within 72 hours will result in fines and possible physical compliance action under HOA Emergency Clause 13. Callie raised an eyebrow. There is no such clause, not in any legitimate HOA bylaws. I checked. How long ago was this sent? She flipped the envelope over. 5 days. So the guy showing up yesterday was already assuming we'd ignore it. She nodded. They're operating on a clock. Pressure. They want you too scared to push back, too confused to challenge the timeline. It's classic coercion strategy. My gut twisted. How far does this go? Callie hesitated. far enough that the board has had multiple reports filed against it. Most were closed quietly, but there's one name that keeps showing up in every file: James Whitlock. Who is he? Board president. Former real estate developer. Lost his license in Florida 5 years ago. Came here, got himself elected in a quiet board turnover vote. Since then, 4 cabins bought under duress, 2 foreclosures triggered by compliance infractions, and 1 family disappeared off the property altogether. No forwarding address. I stared at her. That's not a HOA. That's a cartel in khakis. Bingo, she said. My pulse ticked up. So what do? We go to the board meeting. I blinked. They're still holding one after all this? She nodded. They think you're shaken. They think I'll be gone by now. And they definitely don't think we'll show up. And if we do, we'll ask for a warrant. From them. She gave me a thin smile. Exactly. I exhaled. You're going to bait them, she nodded. With just enough rope to see how far they'll hang themselves. She walked back inside to gather documents. I sat there for a moment longer, heart pounding, not from fear, but from realization. These weren't just HOA bullies. They were running a coordinated operation. And my wife was going to walk into their den, not just to expose them, but to make them show their true face on record under pressure. That night, we drove down the mountain past dark houses and dirt roads lined with pine. The meeting was being held in the community center, a 2-room lodge that looked like it belonged in a vacation brochure complete with fake logs and wagon wheels on the wall. We arrived 15 minutes early. The parking lot was already full. Inside, the board members were seated behind a long folding table covered in printed agendas and lukewarm coffee. There were nameplates, but only one name we needed: James Whitlock. A man with slick gray hair, a smug smile, and eyes that scanned the room like a wolf measuring his next meal. We sat in the front row and waited. When the meeting was called to order, he leaned forward and said, "We'd like to begin tonight's compliance review with property owner Callie Brennan." "Ma'am, if you'd step forward." Callie stood slowly. She pulled out her badge and said, "Not without a warrant." The room went silent the second Callie showed her badge. She didn't say anything else, not yet. She simply let the laminate glint under the ceiling fan's flicker, holding it up at chest level like it weighed nothing and everything at once. James Whitlock blinked, faltered for only a heartbeat. But I saw it, that flicker in his eyes. The moment a man realizes he's underestimated his opponent, and badly. The rest of the board members shifted in their seats. Mrs. Clara Aldridge, in a paisley shawl, suddenly stopped fiddling with her agenda. A thin man with 2 perfect hair swallowed hard and folded his hands. They all looked at Whitlock, waiting, watching, wondering if they'd been led too far down a path they couldn't retreat from. Callie stepped forward, but she didn't speak, not yet. She set her badge on the table in front of Whitlock, carefully, deliberately, and then she sat down beside me again in the front row. That silence, it was a weapon. I've seen my wife debrief hardened counterintel trainees with nothing more than stillness. She let people talk. She let them fill the air with assumptions, projections, lies. Because silence creates pressure, and people, especially the guilty, hate pressure. Whitlock cleared his throat. "I see. We have a guest tonight," he said, trying for charm failing. Callie didn't respond. He glanced at the agenda. "Mrs. Brennan, Agent Brennan, this is simply a procedural meeting. We're all neighbors here. I think we've had some confusion recently. That unfortunate visit to your property was a mistake in protocol. A contractor misinterpreted his scope." Callie smiled faintly. Not the warm kind. The go-on dig deeper kind. Whitlock shifted in his chair. "I've already filed an internal notice to have those individuals suspended pending review. It's all being handled." Still, she said nothing. Whitlock leaned back, his voice thinning. "We're here to serve the community, Agent Brennan. We believe in fair play, transparency. Obviously, no one meant to alarm you." He was unraveling. "You seem nervous, Mr. Whitlock," Callie said finally. Her voice was calm, low, and so precise it sliced clean. "Why is that?" He blinked. I wouldn't say nervous, just surprised. We don't usually get federal attendance at board meetings." "Then perhaps you shouldn't impersonate law enforcement," she replied. Gasps. Two people near the back actually stood as if distance might protect them from what was coming. I sat completely still. "You have something to say, Agent Brennan?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but looking like someone gripping the armrests a little too tightly. Callie stood. "I do." She stepped toward the table, one hand in her pocket, the other still resting lightly near her badge. Not threatening, just confident. Owned. She might as well have been on a courtroom floor. "You're operating an HOA that has conducted illegal surveillance, unlawful detainment attempts, and impersonation of federal authority," she said. "You've created documents that mimic legal summons, initiated threats of property seizure without court orders, and deployed individuals with counterfeit credentials onto private land." She turned slightly, addressing the rest of the room. "None of that is procedural. All of that is criminal." A stunned hush fell over the audience. Even the members who might have been in on it looked shaken now. I saw one man reach slowly beneath the table, likely turning off a recording device or deleting one. Callie continued, voice measured. "I've submitted a formal report to federal investigators, not as retaliation, not as a scare tactic, but because someone in this room, maybe more than one, has decided that the laws protecting American homeowners are optional. That fear is a faster tool than truth. That silence can be bought." She locked eyes with Whitlock again. "You were wrong." Whitlock's mask was cracking now. The charming smirk had vanished, replaced by something sour and twitchy. "Now hold on," he said, laughing thinly. "You don't understand the structure here. We're not villains. We're simply enforcing community standards. And you signed the agreement when you purchased the property." Callie raised an eyebrow. "You're referring to the Evergreen Charter." "Exactly," he said, pouncing on her words like a man finding a rope in rising water. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket. "This one, yes, that one." She unfolded it carefully. It was a scanned copy of the original community charter, dated 1999, signed by the original developer and filed with the county. This charter, she said slowly, was nullified in 2011 when the property ownership structure changed hands and the community failed to refile an updated operating agreement with the state registrar. Whitlock's jaw slackened. Callie smiled. "Which means—" She looked out at the crowd again. "Everything this board has done since then is not only unenforceable, it's legally void." A woman in the back clapped, then stopped abruptly when Whitlock shot her a death glare. "You're bluffing," he spat. Callie didn't flinch. "Would you like to see the timestamp copy from the county records office?" She reached into her briefcase and produced the document. It was stapled, official, notarized. He didn't even reach for it. Callie leaned in. "You had power. For a while. Because nobody challenged you. Because people were scared or confused or too tired to fight." She stepped back. "But that ends tonight." Whitlock stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This meeting is adjourned," he barked. "I'll be contacting legal counsel. You've overstepped, Agent." Callie shrugged. "You don't need to." She gestured behind her. 3 people stood at the rear of the room, plainclothes, hands folded, silent, until now. One of them stepped forward, flashing a badge. "James Whitlock, you are under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, impersonation of a government official, unlawful detainment, and misuse of association funds. We ask that you remain available for questioning." Whitlock froze mid-breath. "This is harassment," he muttered. "No," the agent said. "This is accountability." Callie turned back to the crowd. "For those of you here tonight who were unaware, who didn't know what this board was doing behind closed doors, this is your chance to take your neighborhood back. Read your bylaws, file your complaints, demand re-elections." She stepped down from the table. Or she added with a final look at Whitlock, "You can keep pretending you're protected by paper and panic." The room stayed silent for a long beat. Then slowly one person stood. Then another. And another. And the last image I saw before we left that meeting was Whitlock no longer looking like a wolf, but like a man watching his castle crumble from the inside. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after the first wave of battle, not the war. Just the first real clash where lines are drawn, masks are ripped off, and nobody can pretend anymore. Callie sat in the passenger seat with her hand resting on the door, her eyes fixed on the trees slipping past in a blur. The silence wasn't awkward. It was steady, focused, like the calm in her chest was reloading, not retreating. "You okay?" I finally asked, my hands tight on the wheel even though the road was familiar. She didn't look at me. He wasn't just blustering. He knows what he's up against now. I nodded. "Think he'll run? No. Not yet. He'll try to outmaneuver us legally. Smear campaign maybe? Or he'll go quiet and try to hide the paper trail before the subpoenas hit. And the rest of the board." She turned to me finally. Half of them were in shock. The others were playing dumb. It doesn't matter. Once one of them turns, the rest will follow. We reached the driveway as the last light drained from the sky. A string of solar lights lit up our gravel path, casting small halos of safety in the dark. I parked, shut off the engine, and we both sat still for a moment, neither of us ready to move, not yet. Inside the cabin smelled like old cedar and clean wood smoke. Home. But that sense of safety had changed now. It didn't feel violated, but it didn't feel untouched either. Callie made tea while I checked the windows and reset the security alerts she'd installed back when we first bought the place. Just motion detectors and a live camera feed back then, mostly for wildlife. Now they felt like shields. We sat by the fire without talking, just sipping tea and listening to the slow pop and hiss of the logs. Then she spoke. They were testing the limits, she said, seeing how far they could go without someone pushing back. "You think we're the first?" She shook her head. "I think we're just the first who pushed hard enough to make them flinch." I leaned back. "You made him flinch, Cal. You shut him down." With a badge and a stare. She gave a half smile. It wasn't the badge. It was the truth. I looked at her then, not just as my wife, but as someone I still couldn't believe I got to walk through life with. She was battle-tested, steel core strong, and still managed to look graceful doing it. But tonight I saw something else too. Tiredness. Not fatigue, but a soul-deep weariness of always having to stand between power and the people it tries to crush. "You want out?" I asked gently. "Of the fight, I mean." She shook her head. "No, but I want this to matter. Not just for us, for everyone who got steamrolled before we came along." We sat in that silence again, not as a pause, but as a vow. The next morning, the storm hit. It didn't come from the sky. It came from my inbox and my phone. And every neighbor within 10 square miles. We'd gone to sleep thinking we'd struck a blow for truth. We woke up to find we were under siege. First, the email, a community-wide bulletin from the Evergreen Range Homeowners Association Board, unsigned, of course, accusing Callie of using federal status to intimidate volunteer board members. They called her actions an abuse of positional power and accused her of making baseless threats against neighborhood leadership. Second, our cabin's listing on the internal HOA portal, which Callie had hacked into days ago, had been flagged under legal review for compliance seizure. Third, a neighbor, an older man named Marvin Hayes, who we'd helped tow out of a ditch the year before, left us a voicemail saying someone from the board had come to his house asking for statements about us. Marvin, bless him, had thrown them off his porch, but the damage was done. The smear campaign had begun. "What's their play?" I asked. Callie sat at the table, coffee steaming beside her laptop. "They're trying to preempt the investigation, paint us as aggressors, scare anyone who might speak up, and will it work?" She didn't answer right away. "Then not if we move faster." That's when I realized the fight wasn't over. It was just shifting battlegrounds. Callie made a call to a federal compliance officer named Michael Rourke, someone I vaguely remembered from a holiday party years ago. Gruff, voice fast talker, always wore a bolo tie and talked about paper trails like bloodhounds. She explained everything. The documents, the threats, the arrests. When she hung up, she looked at me. "They're dispatching a federal audit team, but we need to buy time and protection. For us, for the evidence," she said, "and the property. They'll try to force us off it before the audit hits. We need to make this place untouchable." We spent the rest of the day digging through county records, property deeds, easement filings, everything that could lock down our legal right to be here. Callie found a quiet gem buried in the 2009 amendments. Our property sat on a parcel originally designated as a recreational law enforcement training retreat. Because of that, it was eligible for temporary federal jurisdiction during active investigation. "Can we trigger that?" I asked. She smiled. already did. By dusk, 2 state marshals were parked at the base of our driveway. Not in full uniform, but real legal and authorized. We offered them coffee and warm cornbread from the oven. They nodded politely, but didn't accept. "We're here to observe," one of them said. Nothing more. It was enough. That night, Callie and I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars come out over the treetops. The marshals stayed in their truck below, barely visible, but always there. The war had moved into new territory. But one thing was clear. They couldn't touch us now. Not with fake notices, not with empty threats, not with black vests and bluffing paperwork. Callie had shut them down, not with force, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Truth. The next morning brought fog, thick, silver-white sheets of it wrapping the trees like smoke. Visibility was maybe 10 yards. It gave the land a quiet, eerie calm, as though even the animals were holding their breath. But beneath that calm, everything was in motion, fast. By 7:00 a.m., 2 more federal vehicles had pulled in behind the marshal's SUV. From them emerged 3 individuals in tailored suits and polished boots. They didn't flash badges. They didn't have to. The posture, the presence, the quiet confidence, they were the law. Callie greeted them with the kind of handshake that meant history. Mutual respect forged in years of classified operations and training courses behind locked doors. I stood back and let them speak in hushed tones, leaning against the porch post with a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. I wasn't used to being the one on the sidelines, but in this war, Callie wasn't just a combatant, she was command. Eventually, one of the agents, a stocky woman with sharp eyes and a scar across her left brow, walked up to me. "Mr. Brennan, we're coordinating a sweep," she said. "Do you mind if we take a look around the property's perimeter?" "Be my guest," I replied. "We've only got deer and firewood out there. But if someone's been snooping, I'd sure like to know." She nodded. "That's what we're here for." An hour later, they found the cameras, 3 of them, hidden in birdhouses along the trail line, all facing toward the cabin. They weren't wildlife cameras. These were newer, sleeker, infrared wireless motion-triggered. Someone had gone to real effort, mounted at eye-level lenses, barely visible under a thin coating of dirt and varnish. One agent, the youngest of the trio, let out a low whistle as he retrieved the 3rd. "These were installed with a blueprint," he said. "Same distance between all 3, same angle. That's tactical surveillance. Someone's watching movements, entries, maybe even waiting for a window of opportunity." Callie inspected them closely. "Encrypted." He shook his head. "Nope, which means they're sloppy. Or arrogant." She gave a tight nod and walked back toward the cabin. I followed, unease crawling up my spine. "They were casing us," I said once we were inside. "Yes," she replied. "But not just us. This wasn't personal. This was routine." That thought chilled me even more. If this kind of surveillance was being deployed regularly across this HOA jurisdiction, how many other residents had been watched, intimidated, manipulated into submission? The implications were massive and ugly. By mid-morning, the audit team had begun unpacking boxes of records, ledgers, and flash drives provided begrudgingly by the county clerk's office, who had received a federal subpoena the day prior. Callie worked with one of the agents to sort through it all at our kitchen table, turning our quiet hideaway into a war room. I helped where I could, flagging items, taking notes, making phone calls to neighbors we trusted. A few of them were willing to talk, most were not. "I can't," one woman whispered over the phone. "I got fined last year for planting daffodils. I had to sell my car to pay it." "They can't do that anymore," I told her. "Yes, they can," she replied. "Until someone gets arrested in front of everyone, they can." Callie heard the call. She didn't say anything, but I saw the way her jaw clenched. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everyone who'd been silenced by fear disguised as policy. Then the news broke. One of the agents, Michael Rourke, received a call from the federal field office. "Your board president is gone," he said grimly, phone still to his ear. "Whitlock?" Callie asked. "Left his house before dawn. Took a personal vehicle. GPS pinged him heading south, then nothing." Burner phone's active, but bouncing between towers. So he ran, I muttered. Rourke looked at Callie. We need to move. Now. What's your plan? She asked. Execute a field visit. The rest of the board's still in town, and we just got confirmation the HOA office is inside a private real estate firm Whitlock started last year, Voss Integrity Solutions. It's a shell front. Of course it is, Callie muttered. Would you come with? He asked her. You really have to ask. 20 minutes later, Callie and the audit team were en route to the HOA office. I stayed behind with the marshals watching over the cabin. For the first time, I felt like the place really was protected, not by law but by clarity. The fog had lifted, at least figuratively. But then something happened I didn't expect. A small black car pulled up the driveway, not fast, cautious. I stood up from the porch and stepped down the path, motioning for the marshals. The driver stepped out. It was Marvin Hayes, but he wasn't alone. A woman in her 60s emerged from the passenger side, sharp features cropped, gray hair, business attire. She carried a folder under her arm like it was a sword. I'm looking for Agent Brennan, she said. She's out at the HOA office, I replied. Can I help? I'm Diane Graves, former treasurer of the board, forced to resign 6 months ago after I questioned some payments. This, she held up the folder, is every dollar they funneled through that shell company. Proof, with signatures. She paused. I didn't have the guts to fight alone. But now that I know someone's standing up, I'm in. I looked at Marvin. He gave a slow, firm nod. We'll testify, he said. All of us who are left. For a second, I didn't speak. Then I stepped forward, took the folder, and said the only thing I could. Welcome to the front line. Callie returned that evening just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting the sky in streaks of gold and blood orange. She looked exhausted but focused, like a soldier coming home from recon, not retreat. I was already on the porch, the folder from Diane Graves resting on my lap like a loaded weapon. I handed it to her wordlessly. She took one look at the cover page, then back at me. Where did you get this? She asked. Diane Graves, former treasurer. Marvin brought her by. They're in. She flipped through the documents quickly. Her eyes sharpened with every page: bank statements, shell transactions, identical signature patterns across multiple vendor names. There were receipts from companies that didn't exist, consulting fees paid out monthly to board members, and most damning of all, a flow of funds from HOA dues into an offshore account under a holding name connected to James Whitlock. This is a smoking gun, she whispered. Enough to shut them down. Callie nodded, and then some. She didn't rest. She marched straight into the cabin, laid the documents across the table, and began cross-referencing them with the files the audit team had left behind. When she paused, it was only to sip black coffee or speak into her encrypted line with Michael Rourke. I watched her from the hallway, my wife, the quiet storm, methodical, relentless, calm. Her posture was straight, even after hours hunched over ledgers. Her eyes, bloodshot from the long day, were still scanning as if justice lived in the margins. Around midnight, she sat back. We're going to take them down, she said. You already are. No, she corrected gently. We're going to. This has to go beyond exposure. There has to be restitution, reform, and prosecution. If all we do is shine a light, they'll scatter and regroup in the shadows. She was right. The next morning, we met with Diane and Marvin at a local diner just outside HOA jurisdiction. Neutral ground. Half a dozen other neighbors joined us, folks who'd previously kept their heads down, but now showed up with manila envelopes, scribbled notes, even flash drives. There was Olivia Reed, who'd been fined over $9,000 for having a privacy fence the board suddenly decided violated aesthetic continuity. There was Ken Larson, a single father who'd received anonymous threats about his landscaping choices, then had his property listed for forced sale due to non-payment of compliance dues he'd never received. There was Mr. Harold Thompson, who once filed a complaint and woke up to find his mailbox bashed in and HOA notices stapled to his fence like warning signs. They all told their stories, one by one. And Callie listened to each of them with that unwavering focus, the kind that made people feel heard and protected. By the end of the meeting, she had names, dates, document copies, and perhaps, most importantly, the trust of a community that had spent too long suffering in silence. "We're going to present all of this to the federal audit team," she said. "You'll each be listed as voluntary witnesses. That gives you protection and leverage." A few of them looked afraid still, but most nodded. They were ready. Back at the cabin, the marshals had expanded their presence. One had been joined by a partner, and a portable antenna dish now sat discreetly tucked into a pine thicket. Callie coordinated with them as we prepared our formal report for submission. But as the sun dipped again, and the forest returned to its twilight hush, something in me stirred uneasily. They hadn't made a move. Not since Whitlock ran. Not since the federal agents showed up. It was too quiet. Just as I voiced that concern to Callie, one of the marshals approached the porch. "Ma'am," he said, "we've been monitoring chatter on a local encrypted radio frequency. Short bursts, patterned, military style." Callie stood. "We're about 4 miles east near an old service road. Looks like the HOA had a backup comms channel, probably for internal enforcement." Callie's jaw tensed. "They're regrouping." The marshal nodded. "Most likely. We're not ruling out retaliation attempts." Retaliation. It sounded absurd. This was a homeowners association. Lawn signs, dog poop, rules pool passes. But it wasn't that anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. And now that they were exposed, their true nature was crawling to the surface like rot from under paint. That night, we implemented new protocols. Callie installed motion sensors deeper in the woods. The marshals added a third patrol unit to cover the back ridge. I reinforced the cabin's locks and added trail cameras of our own this time, encrypted and concealed by someone who knew how to hide them better. We weren't scared. We were prepared. 2 days later, the audit report was finalized. Michael Rourke called from the regional office, with the final draft cross-referenced with Callie's findings, Diane's documents, and testimony from 8 other homeowners. "This is ironclad," he said. "We're greenlighting a federal complaint. DOJ's been briefed. You should expect a response from the U.S. attorney within 48 hours. I watched Callie's shoulders relax a fraction. Just a fraction. But then the twist came. Rourke's voice tightened on the line. "One more thing. We traced a wire transfer from Whitlock's Shell account." Callie's brow furrowed. "To where, not where Rourke said. To whom?" He paused. "A man named Eli Voss." Callie went still. I could see it in her eyes. "Eli Voss," she repeated. "Yeah. That name means something." She nodded slowly. "He's ex-federal. Used to run deep compliance for DHS before he went private. Ruthless, smart, quiet, and the last person I'd expect to see involved in something this small." Rourke exhaled. Then this just got bigger. We stood on the porch after the call ended, both of us watching the tree line like it might shift or blink. "You know him?" I asked. She nodded. "I trained under him, years ago. He taught me how to break networks like this, and now he's running one," maybe she said. "Or maybe he's the real reason this HOA has been untouchable." We didn't speak for a while after that. The wind picked up, the trees rustled, and I knew deep in my chest that we weren't just fighting corrupt neighbors anymore. We were stepping into something older, smarter, more dangerous. But Callie didn't look shaken. She looked sharper, colder, ready. "This isn't just about Evergreen," she said. "This is a model, a test run. For what? For a system of control that wears a friendly face." The summons went out at dawn. U.S. Marshals served 5 board members before breakfast. Diane Graves, now reinstated as interim treasurer by unanimous vote after the emergency meeting hand-delivered the notifications with full federal backing. The town's local paper printed the headline, in bold, "HOA Board under federal investigation for fraud surveillance, extortion." The words hit like an earthquake. I watched from the porch as neighbors wandered past the cabin road with stunned expressions, mouths slightly open, conversations halting mid-sentence. It was like they'd all been holding their breath for years, and now someone had pulled the lid off the pressure cooker, but Callie wasn't smiling. Not yet. The night before, after the call about Eli Voss, she barely slept. She laid out every report, every receipt, every transcript on the cabin floor like pieces of a war map. I brought her tea, then whiskey. She barely touched either. By 3 a.m., she had connected the dots. This HOA wasn't just about Whitlock, she said. He was the front man, the straw puppet. Voss used him to test how much power he could build inside a civilian structure without ever holding office. Why Evergreen, I asked. Because it's isolated. Wealthy retirees, vacation cabins, people who don't like drawing attention. People trained to respect hierarchy, silence, appearances. She paused. It was the perfect lab. Now in the courthouse, 3 counties, away from the HOA's jurisdiction for safety and neutrality, Callie stood beside the federal attorneys, while I sat 2 rows back, shoulder to shoulder with Marvin Hayes, Diane Graves, and a half-dozen other brave neighbors. The courtroom wasn't flashy. Pale green walls, dull fluorescent lighting. It smelled faintly of old paper and vinyl. But the energy in the room, electric. James Whitlock entered in cuffs. No suit, no smug grin, just an orange jumpsuit too large for his withering frame. The other 4 board members, 2 in suits. Mrs. Clara Aldridge, still wearing a cardigan. Another pale and shaking walked in behind him, flanked by federal agents. The gallery behind us was full. Reporters, other HOA residents, and a few familiar faces from town. Some still looked in disbelief. Some, God bless them, looked hopeful. The judge was stern, straight-backed, and didn't waste time. "Let's move forward with the formal arraignment," she said. "Mr. Whitlock, do you understand the charges?" The courtroom clerk read each one aloud. "Fraudulent misuse of homeowner funds, unlawful surveillance and data collection, impersonation of law enforcement, attempted coercion through falsified documentation, abuse of civilian association authority, obstruction of justice during a federal investigation." Each count hit like a drum, and Whitlock, for the first time since we met him, didn't say a word. He didn't blink. He just stared ahead, hollow-eyed. His lawyer pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail at $2.5 million. It wasn't met. One by one, the other board members entered their pleas. 2 also went with not guilty. One broke down in tears and whispered guilty to every charge. Mrs. Clara Aldridge collapsed into her seat when the judge denied her bail. But the real blow came next. A new name was introduced into evidence, Eli Voss. Callie's hands tensed just slightly. Michael Rourke stood to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, "we have evidence connecting the fraudulent operation of the Evergreen Range Homeowners Association to a private entity known as Voss Integrity Solutions. A forensic accounting trail shows multiple payments to this shell company in exchange for strategic consulting surveillance equipment and coercion methodologies." He handed over the documents. "And who owns that company?" the judge asked. Eli Voss Rourke replied, "Former DHS compliance director, now operating as a civic operations specialist. He's not in custody yet, but we've issued a federal warrant." The courtroom stirred. The judge leaned forward. "Then I suggest your team finds him fast." Rourke nodded. When recess was called, the room exhaled. I followed Callie out to the lobby where a line of reporters waited for her. "Thanked her." She didn't flinch. "Are you officially part of this investigation?" Agent Brennan one asked. "I'm not speaking in an official capacity," she said. "But I am here as a witness, as a resident, and as someone who has trained agents for over a decade. What we're seeing today is not just justice for one neighborhood. It's a warning shot to anyone who thinks they can weaponize civilian systems to control the vulnerable." Flashbulbs lit the room. Microphones surged forward. "Is this bigger than Evergreen?" "Yes," she said. "But Evergreen is where it ends." Back at the cabin that night, the woods were quieter than usual. Not in a tense way, in a true way. The fog had lifted. The birds returned. The wind in the trees didn't feel like it was hiding something anymore. Callie sat beside me on the porch steps, knees tucked up under her, sipping something warm. "You did it," I said. She shook her head. "We did it." I nodded. "Think he'll run far, Voss?" she asked. "He'll run. But he won't hide for long. And when we find him, we'll shut the whole network down." A light breeze stirred the branches above. "What happens to the HOA?" I asked. She leaned back. "The federal office will dissolve it. New elections will be supervised. But more than that, people will remember. They'll read their bylaws. They'll stop letting someone else control their homes." She turned to me and smiled finally, a real smile. "This place, this little cabin, it stood for something. You stood for something," I said. "No," she whispered. "We stood together." For the first time in weeks, I let my guard down. And as the stars blanketed the mountain sky, I realized something else. We hadn't just reclaimed our land. We'd reclaimed the meaning of community. Spring arrived all at once that year. One morning, the trees were still skeletal and frost-lined. The next, they exploded in buds and wild green, vivid, chaotic, beautiful. It was like the land had been waiting, holding itself back through the storms and courtroom tension just for this exact moment. The cabin, too, seemed to breathe easier. The walls no longer felt like they held secrets. The windows opened wider. Even the creaking floorboards had a softer tone to them, like an old friend settling into a well-earned rest. It had been 3 weeks since the courtroom showdown. James Whitlock remained in custody, denied bail again, after the DOJ classified the HOA scheme as part of a larger, fraudulent network targeting semi-rural communities across the state. 2 more HOA boards in neighboring counties were already under investigation. Their documents eerily similar. Same bylaw language, same shell company links, same compliance enforcement tactics. The name Eli Voss appeared on each set of contracts. He was now a wanted man, with his photo posted on federal bulletins and local news outlets. A ghost with a pedigree. But his network was crumbling fast. As for Evergreen Range, it no longer existed as a legal entity. The judge, after reviewing a full audit of their activity, ruled that the Evergreen Range Homeowners Association had engaged in persistent and deliberate abuse of homeowner trust and ordered its immediate dissolution. All prior citations were nullified. All liens canceled. The board's remaining funds, over $500,000, were frozen pending victim restitution. Our cabin was ours again. No paperwork threat, no clipboard enforcer, no looming fines for the way we planted rosemary near the fence line. Just peace. Callie and I held a quiet celebration. Not a party, just a night where we lit candles on the porch, uncorked a bottle of wine that had been sitting under the sink for 5 years, and said nothing for a long time. Because silence when chosen is a gift. It was the next morning that the new sign arrived, hand-delivered by Diane Graves, now officially head of the Neighborhood Oversight Council, a volunteer group with zero authority and full transparency. Just a few good people making sure potholes got filled and mailboxes stayed upright. The sign was simple. Wooden carved, sealed in weatherproof varnish. It read, Cabin 19, home of Brennan and Brennan, no trespassing. No intimidation, no HOA. Callie laughed when she saw it. Little on the nose, don't you think, she said. I like noses, I replied, planting it beside the drive like a flag in the soil. The days that followed were filled with unexpected calm. Neighbors we barely knew brought pies, potted plants, and gratitude. Olivia Reed knitted a set of porch blankets and left them in a basket labeled for the ones who stood up. I didn't even know her name. Callie returned to work not the FBI office, but to her real mission. She began developing a new curriculum for agency use civilian system infiltration, recognizing and dismantling unauthorized power structures. She was going to train the next generation of agents not just to fight crime, but to recognize corruption in everyday forms. In town halls, on paper, behind neighborhood smiles. As for me, I finally cleaned out the old tool shed, fixed the roof, restrained the porch, rebuilt the firewood shelter by hand. Not because I had to, but because it was mine to fix. My space, my rules, my land. One afternoon, I caught Callie watching me from the window, smiling faintly. What I asked. You, she said. You look happy. I paused. And then I realized, so did she. Maybe for the first time in years, we both did. A week later, we hosted a cookout. Nothing fancy. Just burgers, beans, lemonade, and laughter. 20 neighbors came, then 30. Even Marvin Hayes brought his guitar. Kids played tag between the pines. Old disputes faded like smoke. And no one mentioned the board. No one needed to. At the end of the night, I raised a glass and stood on the porch where it had all started, where Callie had stood her ground badge, gleaming fire in her spine. This land, I said, was never about square footage or lot lines. It's about knowing what's yours and defending it not with fists or fear, but with truth, integrity, and one hell of a smart woman who doesn't blink under pressure. They laughed. Callie rolled her eyes. But I saw the way she looked at me. Later, As the stars came out, and the laughter faded into the hush of crickets, and the occasional crackle of dying firewood, I sat beside her and whispered something I'd been holding onto since the day the first SUV showed up. "Thank you," I said. She turned. "For what?" "For fighting for our home. For all of us." She didn't answer right away. Just leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat like that until the moon was high and the forest wrapped us up like a prayer. And as the night deepened, I knew one thing with perfect clarity. They could build their fences, forge their fake badges, write their false rules, but here, this cabin, this life, these trees and stars and wood smoke nights, this was ours. Always had been. Always would be.